who are interested in attending, please contact me to send an email to president@fairfaxcountysepta.org and let us know if you're interested in coming. And the sooner the better. We're hoping to send in all of our registrations at once. All right, let's move on to our presentation. So we're going to welcome Dr. Stixrud, and bear with us here. And there he is. And Amanda is going to help us out with switching around our cameras a bit. So thank you. Dr. Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist and the co-author with Ned Johnson of the best-selling book, The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives. He's also a member of the adjunct faculty of Children's National Medical Center, as well as an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at George Washington University School of Medicine. He additionally is a frequent lecturer on topics related to neuropsychological assessment, brain development, motivation, meditation, and the effects of stress, sleep deprivation, and technology overload on the brain. So couldn't be more timely. His work has been featured in publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Times of London, Wall Street Journal, US News and World Report, Time Magazine, Scientific American, Business Week, Barron's, and New York Magazine. He's a longtime practitioner of transcendental meditation, and he's a musician who plays in a rock band called Close Enough, which I did look up online in preparation for tonight. It's actually very awesome. I personally have heard Dr. Stixrud speak numerous times in the past. I'm absolutely delighted that we have been able to have him join us here this evening. And so I'm going to turn things over to him. We will keep the chat open. If you have questions, you can enter them and we will try to be collecting them and then answer questions at the end.
If you are watching on YouTube, I am opening up the live chat in YouTube now, so you can submit questions there. You may need to refresh your page, just as an FYI.
All right, so I think that Dr. Stixrud, you should be good to go.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me. And I'm a neuropsychologist, and I make a living by testing kids and who have any kind of issues. And I try to figure out what's going right and what's going wrong and how to help them. And I've done it for 36 years, and I'm just not tired. I still love doing it. In part, I love what kids say. Within the last 3 years, I tested these 3 kids who have autism. And I tested I see a lot of kids with autism. These 3 particular kids, they're sitting across the table from me when I'm testing them, and they look over to their right and they see a picture of me in a tuxedo and my daughter in a wedding gown. And all 3 kids said, "You got married?" I said, "Yeah, I did like 42 years ago. That's me at my daughter's wedding." And these 3 kids, they said with disgust in their voices, said, "You married your daughter?" It's a fun way to make a living. But in any case, I'm going to talk tonight about autonomy and a sense of control. The book that was mentioned, the Self-Driven Child, that Ned Johnson and I wrote 3 years ago, it's about how important it is for young people and for all of us really to have a healthy sense of control of our own lives. And I'm going to talk about why that is. I'm going to talk about why kids who have special needs have greater challenges in developing this sense of control or autonomy. And then finally, I'll spend most of my time talking about what we can do to support this sense of control, this sense of autonomy in kids, because if we want kids to be independent, they have to have a sense of autonomy. They have to have a sense that this is their life and they're going to get out of it what they put into it. And so we'll brainstorm ways to get there. I'm hoping that somebody can monitor the chat, because I'm old enough that I don't easily monitor the chat. So I'll talk for a little less than an hour, and then hopefully somebody can just tell Tim what the questions are, and I can respond to them.
We'll get you on that.
Great. I'm happy to respond to any questions. So and I'm just going to talk. I get tired of PowerPoints. I'm just going to talk. And so the first thing I want you to know is that a sense of control is really important in part because it's hugely related to mental health. That the lowest thing that we have this unprecedented level of stress-related mental health problems. And we know that a sense of control is hugely related to stress tolerance, to resilience. Also, motivational development is enormously related to the sense of autonomy or control. So it's a really big deal for any kid. And what I want to explain is what it is and what it isn't. A healthy sense of control means I'm not passive, I'm not helpless, I'm not hopeless, or I'm not chronically anxious and overwhelmed all the time. It means that I'm focused, I have a sense that my efforts matter, I can move my direction in my life in the direction that I want to. And it doesn't mean that a kid gets to control everything, or your 7-year-old gets to be the boss of the family. It just means they don't feel helpless, passive, resigned. They don't feel continually pressured or anxiously driven or obsessively, perfectionistically driven. It's that sweet spot where you're engaged, you're motivated, you're focused, but you aren't exhausted and you aren't chronically stressed. And it's a sense of control. It doesn't mean actually being controlled. If you're in a hotel room, there's obnoxious buzzing from the next room. Somebody from the hotel comes and knocks on your door and says, I'm really sorry about the buzzing. Here's a little button. Just press the button and it'll attenuate the buzzing. That you press that button and your stress level goes down, whether or not the button works at all. Just having something to do really lowers your stress level. And I think that this may be particularly relevant in COVID. This past summer, Ned and I presented to this group out in Seattle, Washington, and a mother wrote into the chat. She said, I've been fighting every day with my 6-year-old about trying to do her online learning. And yesterday she drew a picture of a meteorite hitting mommy. Should I be worried? I mean, it's a stressful time. And part of what we want to do is help kids have a healthy sense of control. I just saw a study today in Germany that looked at from March to April 2020, and parents supporting autonomy in their kids, and how much better the kids did, and how much better the parents did compared to the parents who weren't supporting autonomy. So it's a big deal. And probably many of you know that we have these unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness in young people, and these skyrocketing rates of suicide, and all of these are stress-related problems. When Ned and I were writing the book, we were paying attention to research by somebody by the name of Jean Twenge out in San Diego State. And Twenge had looked at responses to a personality inventory that was made in the 1930s. So she actually could look at the responses of people high school and college age going back to the Great Depression. And what she found was that young people, like in between 2000 and 2007, were 5 to 8 times more likely to report the symptoms of anxiety disorder or major depression than people were at the height of the Great Depression, during World War II, during the Cold War, during the Vietnam War. And when we were working on the book, actually while we were working on the book, she wrote a piece in The Atlantic called "Has the Smartphone Destroyed a Generation?" Because she said, I've studied generational differences my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this spike in anxiety, depression, loneliness in young people between 2012 and 2017. So now, what's this have to do with a sense of control? We know there's a neuroscientist in Canada who says we can summarize what makes life stressful with the acronym NUTS. And the N is novelty, new situations. U is unpredictability. T is potential threat, perceived threat. And S is a low sense of control. And the stress scientist says it's that low sense of control that's the most stressful. Because you can be in a new situation, you could be in an unpredictable situation, even a threatening situation. But if you have the sense, I can handle this, that it's just not that stressful. It's where something's happening and you don't know what to do, and the doctor doesn't know what to do, or your teachers don't know what to do. And that's the really stressful situation where nobody knows what to do, where you have that very low sense of control. And so we want to culture in kids because it protects them. Having a healthy sense of control protects them from emotional problems. And many of the kids that Ned and I work with, especially as teenagers and growing up in this area with all this academic pressure, they have the idea that the most important outcome of their childhood and adolescence is getting into an elite college. And from our point of view, having seen so many kids just burn out trying to do that, that our point of view is the most important outcome is sculpting a healthy brain, developing a brain that can be focused, engaged, motivated, but it's just not chronically stressed and chronically tired and chronically unhappy. So that's where we are, this healthy brain, because we want kids to be able to enjoy their success. And we know a ton of adults who are extremely successful who are miserable and just don't enjoy their success. And we know that we know what we can do, what to do to help kids develop brains that are focused, engaged, motivated, determined, but aren't highly stressed and tired most of the time. So I'll come back to that. Now, we think about a sense of control in two dimensions. One is the subjective sense of agency or autonomy. This is my life. The other is the neurological state that supports that. And what this is where the prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the brain that can think clearly, plan, organize, put things in perspective, can talk yourself down when you start to get upset. The prefrontal cortex regulates the rest of the brain, including the amygdala, this very primitive part of your brain that senses and reacts to threat and starts your stress response. And we know that the best neurological marker of emotional resilience, that ability to handle stuff and bounce back quickly when you start to get upset, is the strength of the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And so one of our goals in supporting kids development, is supporting the development of a healthy sense of control, because it supports this development of healthy strong connections between prefrontal cortex and amygdala, and vice versa. And I'll come back and talk more about how we do that. Now, Ned and I've been lecturing about the importance of autonomy for many years. And just in the last 5 years or so, I learned about a guy who really put this whole idea of a sense of control on the map. His name is Steve Mayer, and he's a psychologist at the University of Colorado. And he studies rats, and rats actually have brains that are structured a lot like humans. And you can do studies with rats you can't do with humans. And so his main paradigm, he's got rat A and rat B. They're in plexiglass cages with their tail hanging outside the cage. There's a little electrode on their tail. There's a wheel inside the cage. Rat A, tail gets shocked. It's not real painful, but it's annoying and he wants to stop. And he discovers if he turns the wheel, the shock stops. Rat B is yoked to rat A. So rat B gets shocked, turns the wheel, nothing happens. It only stops when rat A turns the wheel. Rat A learns I can control stressful situations. After several experiences like this, rat A becomes almost impossible to stress, because something stressful happens, he just goes into coping mode. He just turns that wheel, metaphorically, because what happens in these studies is that they disconnect the wheel, and rat A still, he just turns that wheel, he's doing whatever he needs to do, and he's not that stressed, because once you activate the prefrontal cortex, it dampens down the stress response. You just go into coping mode as opposed to whimpering or freaking out or going berserk. You go into coping mode. And that's what we want for kids. And Meyer says it's that sense of control that inoculates you from the harmful effects of stress. Rat B, the shock stops, but he didn't stop it. He doesn't develop that healthy sense of control. Rat B becomes a nervous wreck who is incredibly easy to stress. So it has this protective effect that experience of a sense of control builds emotional resilience, that high stress tolerance, and confidence that I can handle this. So that's the mental health. That's the connection between a sense of control or autonomy and mental health. Now, here's the motivational piece, and we'll talk more about this. Every place that Ned and I look to try to understand how do people become self-motivated, all the arrows pointed in the direction of autonomy. And we first looked at something called self-determination theory, which if you don't know about it, read a little bit about it. It's just a beautifully elegant theory of intrinsic or internal motivation. And what it holds is that to be intrinsically motivated, you have to have three needs met for a sense of relatedness. You know, you work harder for somebody you want to work hard for because you're connected to them. B is a sense of competence. You know, if something's really, you're terrible at something, you aren't that motivated to work at it. And C is a sense of autonomy. And we asked one of the two guys who created self-determination theory 30 years ago, we said, our sense is that autonomy is probably, if you're going to lean on one, it's probably that autonomy. He said, absolutely, that's the key. This supporting autonomy is huge for developing that internal motivation. And some of the kids we work with, I mean, it looks like what it gets emphasized more than anything else is the competence part. But both the kids at the most elite students who all they can think about is building their academic resume to go to elite college. It's just competence. And kids who have learning issues or other special needs, I mean, we keep promoting competence, often at the expense of our relationship with our kids, and often at the expense of promoting autonomy, the sense that this is their life. So self-determination theory, it's all about a balance between relatedness, competence, and autonomy. And if you're going to lean on one, don't lean on the competence, lean on the autonomy. We also, the other major motivational model that many of you are familiar with, I'm sure, is Carol Dweck's mindsets work, the growth mindset. The growth mindset is, I get better through my own efforts, versus a fixed mindset, I'm born with a certain amount of ability and there's not much I can do about it. So I got to protect myself so I don't look stupid. Or and if somebody gives me something hard to do, I'll try to give up, or hopefully it'll give me something easy so I won't look stupid. And this growth mindset is nothing but a sense of control. I can get better through my own efforts. And so, and also we looked at flow, what's called flow theory. And the experience of flow, you've all had it. This experience of flow, that experience where you're very engaged in something, so engaged that it requires your full attention, your full effort. And it's something typically that you enjoy doing. So it's not really stressful. It's not, you aren't panicked while you're doing it, but you're really motivated. You're really determined. You're engaged, you're focused. It requires your full effort. This experience of flow, where you can be doing something like that for an hour and it feels like 15 minutes went by. And there's a researcher who I discovered some years ago who studies adolescent development. And he looked, one of his studies, or a couple of studies, were looking at how do children turn into self-motivated adolescents and adults. And counterintuitively, he concluded it wasn't through dutifully doing their homework. It's through what he called the passionate pursuit of pastimes. Whether it was art, little kids building with Legos, art, music, dance, coding, sports. Even 15 years ago, he said video games probably don't count. We could talk more about that. But when kids are doing something they're completely engaged in, it requires their full effort. What Lyon said is they're sculpting a brain that's used to that brain state of high energy, high motivation, high focus, high determination, low stress. And that's the kind of brain state ideally we're in most of the time, where we're engaged, we're in the present, we like what we're doing, we're focused on it, and yet we aren't highly stressed and we aren't exhausted. And this initially seemed a little counterintuitive, as I said, but then I thought about my own life, and I graduated from high school with a 2.8 grade point average. And my senior year of high school, I flunked English the first quarter, and I had a 2.0 grade point average. And but I was really passionate. I don't remember ever getting past page 50 in a book. I don't remember turning an assignment in on time in high school. What I remember is being completely passionate about rock and roll. I was in a band then too. Actually, with a couple of the same people I'm in a band with now. But I would every night I would go into this music room where I had an organ and I had a record player, and I'd learn songs, or I practiced my instrument. I teach myself the music theory, and every night I'd tell myself, well, I'll study, I'll do this for an hour, and then I'll study. And I'd come out of my music room 3 hours later, having no idea what time it was, and just having been completely and utterly absorbed in the music. And my father died right at the end of my senior year in high school. And 2 months later, I started college as a straight A student. Now, I think my father's dying kind of woke me up. It grew me up. I mean, I started to take school more seriously. But also, I figured, because I could hit the ground running, because I'd sculpted a brain that was really familiar with that brain state of high effort, high focus, high determination, low stress. And when I work with kids who are underachievers, and I tell them, especially when they're in high school, I say, if there's something you work hard at to get better and better and better, I don't worry about you. And I don't worry about you because I know that if you decide that school is more important to you, you're going to be able to go pedal to the metal, because you're going to be sculpting a brain that knows how to do that. So that's the connection between sense of control or autonomy and motivation, because when you're experiencing this flow, a complete sense of control. It's not that I'm controlling everything. In fact, you are trying to control, but you have that feeling of being able to shape. You aren't helpless at all. You aren't hopeless at all. And you aren't overwhelmed. So that's the connection with motivation. And clearly, there's a lot of individual differences. I have two granddaughters, and they're 7 and 5, and they're just wired differently. And before the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, their father said, one day before he went to work, he said, "Girls," he said, "when I get home from work tonight, I want to do something fun with you. So first I want you to clean up your toys." So when they got home that afternoon, according to my wife, who picked them up, the 7-year-old, who's very dutiful, said, "Miriam, let's clean up our toys so we can do something fun with Daddy." And Miriam just said, "Let's just do something boring with Daddy so we don't have to clean up." So people are wired differently, but it's all good. And now let me talk a little bit about why kids who have special needs have more trouble developing the sense of control. And I'm going to focus on ADHD initially, because so many kids who have learning disabilities also have ADHD. So many kids who have autism also have ADHD. So it covers a lot of territory. So the first thing is simply difficulty activating. Is it just getting yourself to focus on stuff lowers your sense of control. And we know that one of the things that characterizes kids with ADHD is this inconsistency in their focus. And inconsistency leads to unpredictability, which lowers your sense of control. And you have trouble getting yourself to do even stuff you want to do. And also, we know that ADHD is characterized in part by relatively low levels of dopamine, the neurotransmitter for drive, so that you just can't get yourself going as easily as most kids. We also know that the impulsivity associated with the hyperactive impulsive type of ADHD can contribute to low sense of control, because kids repeatedly do things that they regret, and they're constantly told, stop doing that, stop doing that, and they can't. So which affects that development of sense of control. Also, kids with ADHD commonly have difficulty sleeping. And all of us experience a much healthier sense of control when we're well rested than when we're tired. So that contributes too. And then also that because kids with ADHD or learning disabilities or autism, because they oftentimes, we have to motivate them to get to do stuff, we use rewards. And we focus on the competence part, getting them to do work, getting them to work on stuff that's hard for them. And understandably, we use rewards oftentimes and to motivate them. And the challenge is that rewards tend to undermine intrinsic motivation and thereby sense of control. And we're wired not to want to be controlled by other people. So the rewards ultimately we don't want them to be a big part of our tool, big component in our toolkit. I'm okay with rewards, and I'll tell you about how I suggest using them if we do use rewards in some contexts. But I think that this one of the things that for kids who have any kind of special need, that this developing sense of control is more challenging, is we try to motivate them by using rewards that undermines that internal sense of control. We also basically take a lot of responsibility for the kids' work. So we develop these elaborate homeschool communication programs where we go online to see what the kids is. Here, you need to do this assignment. And oftentimes we spend 80 units of energy worrying about the kids' schoolwork. And if we spend 80 units, the kid's going to spend 20. That's always my experience. And so we have that. We also have, I mean, so often that we force kids to work with a tutor or speech and language pathologist, even though they don't want to. And I'm not saying we should never do it, but we should never if they don't want to, or they get to do whatever they want. But I am saying that so many of the kids that I see spend a huge amount of energy resisting other people's attempts to help them, which is not a very good way to use your energy. So we have that. So many kids I see, they work with executive functioning coaches, and even though they don't want to, and for most of the part, it's a complete waste of time and money. And it may be counterproductive because, again, kids spend the energy they could use on self-development resisting other people's attempts to help them. That oftentimes kids feel forced to take medication. And again, they just use this energy resisting. And when Ned and I were writing this self-driven child, it was really interesting because I was looking to find that there's hundreds of studies on promoting autonomy in students and how powerful what they call autonomy support is. I could find one study on learning disabilities promoting autonomy in students, none on autism, none on ADHD. This was in like 2017. Now, it's interesting. There's a woman, as I was writing the book, there's a woman who published a book. Her name is Margaret Sibley, and she developed a program. The acronym is STAND, S-T-A-N-D, all caps. I can't remember what it stands for, but you could look it up. Margaret Sibley. And what she concluded is that most parents of kids with ADHD, 40%, by the time the kid's 16, are completely burnt out, trying to manage the kid's life and say, you're on your own, buddy, I can't take this anymore. 40% are still kind of micromanaging the kid's life, and about 20% are in this kind of sweet spot of supporting kids, but supporting their autonomy and not taking responsibility for stuff that's theirs. And she developed this STAND program, which is a therapy program for families that focuses on supporting autonomy. That was the only thing I could find in the whole field of special needs that focuses on supporting autonomy. Now, I will mention that just recently, then I just finished we're just finishing a second book, and I was able to get asked a question of one of the experts, the world's expert on autism, Peter Vermeulen, who's being interviewed by somebody who interviewed Ned and I about our book. And so I asked him, what does he think about autonomy support? And it turns out he had written about using self-determination theory with people with autism, focusing on that relatedness and focusing on the autonomy piece. It's equally important because if we want people to be independent, want our kids to be independent, they have to have that sense of autonomy. And so how do we get there? Well, I want to mention one other thing. One of the other factors is this: the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. And kids with ADHD, kids with autism, kids with learning disabilities are more vulnerable to anxiety because it's stuff's hard for them. They worry about being embarrassed or of other kids. And what happens a lot is that kids if this stuff's hard for them, they avoid it and they let us worry about it. They let us say, you need to do your homework now, as opposed to thinking, I better do my homework. That's another dynamic that complicates this development sense control, is they tend to avoid stuff that's hard. So we try to do more forcing or more bribing of them to try to get them to do it. And then the last thing I want you to know is that kids with ADHD, kids with learning disabilities, kids with autism, anxiety disorders, whatever we're talking about here, they want their life to work. I mean, I've never met a kid who didn't want to be successful. They want the life to work. They want to do well if they can, and that's the energy we want to side with. Is that part of our kid that wants to do well. So let me tell you about how some of the ways we get there. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about comes out of my experience when fairly early experiences fairly early in my career, the first few years, where I was doing neuropsychological testing that I've always done. But the first 13 or 14 years, I also did a lot of psychotherapy with children and parents and families. And I'd noticed stuff like, because I saw so many kids with ADHD, that I'd have parents say, oh my God, I dread dinner time. Because after dinner, it's 3 hours of World War III trying to get my kid to do his homework. And I go to a school meeting. This still happens all the time. Just recently, I went to a meeting at a Catholic school, and the kid I just tested, who was 13 years old, 8th grade, really a sweet kid, but had a language disorder, learning disabilities, ADHD. School was hard for him, and 8th graders are applying out to other Catholic high schools, so a lot of pressure on him to do well. I go to this meeting in school, and one of the learning specialists says, it takes 2 learning specialists and a tutor and the mother on top of this kid all the time to get him to do any work. And I noticed early in my career how often, if the adults are spending 90 units of energy trying to get a kid to work, the kid will spend 10. And my experience is, if the parents get more anxious, the adults get more anxious, and they go up to 95, the kid will sink to 5. And what I found is that it's not a matter of maturity. It didn't change until the energy changed. I've worked with underachieving kids my whole career, and I've always asked them, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And invariably they say, my mother. Then I say, who's next most upset? And they say, my dad. Who's next most upset? My teacher. Who's next? My tutor. Then my therapist. Then my sister, who she hates to fight. And the kid's never on the list. And this always seemed to me there's something wrong with that picture. And early in my career, one of my friends, who is also a neuropsychologist, did training in certain kinds of psychotherapy. And the therapists were taught, don't work harder to help your clients solve their problems than they do, because you're going to weaken them, because they're going to end up thinking that somehow the solutions to their problems are within you, not within them. And I thought this is brilliant. And over the last 30 some years, I've trained hundreds of tutors to work with kids who have learning disabilities or ADHD or autism. And I've always told them, don't work harder to help your client get better at whatever you're working on than the kid does, because you're going to weaken him. And if it feels to you like you're putting in more energy in this than he is, if he's fighting you, say, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture, because I feel like I'm working harder to help you get good at reading than you are. And I really care about you. And I don't want to weaken you, so I'm not going to work harder than you do. And almost always, when the tutors did that and changed the energy, the kid would step up to the plate. And so the first thing is the idea I want to introduce is, as kids get older, especially after out of preschool, increasingly we want to think about ourselves more as a consultant to our kid than as the kid's boss or manager or the homework police. And in 1986, I wrote a couple articles about homework. And the first one, I reviewed what does research tell us about homework and its effects on learning. And I was stunned to learn that after 60 years of research at that time, that homework didn't seem to contribute to learning at all in elementary school. And I thought, God, how crazy is this? It doesn't, there's so much fussing and fighting, it's so stressful, and it doesn't seem to be necessary for learning. And after 90 some years of research now, it's still the case, which is still, it drives me nuts that kids have all this stress, all this pressure, all this fighting at home about homework that they don't really need to do to learn. Now, so what I suggested, I wrote a second article that was in McCall's magazine, just how not to fight with your kid about homework. And when I said it's just tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And then say, I'm willing to do anything I can to help you. I'm willing to be your homework consultant. I'm willing to sit for 6:30 to 7:30 every night and while you do your homework. I'm willing to help you figure out what you need to do. I'm willing to help you track your assignments, but I'm not willing to try to force you to do your work. I mean, obviously I couldn't force you. All you have to do is close your eyes or flop to the floor. I couldn't make you do it. And also, I don't want to act like it's my responsibility because if I can't make you do it, it couldn't be my responsibility. And I don't want to weaken you by taking responsibility for something that's yours. So you start to think about yourself more as a consultant. And this is the second chapter of A Self-Driven Child is called I Love You Too Much to Fight with You About Your Homework. And it's not intuitive to everybody. One of my clients read our book right when it came out and sent me an email and said, I just told my 8th grade son, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And first he smiled, and then he hugged me, and then he said, is something wrong with you, Mom? Apparently that wasn't quite the conversation they'd been having previously. But in any case, so this idea of thinking about yourself more as a consultant to your kid, not working harder than your kid does, not taking responsibility for what's his, that this is a powerful idea. And it has 4 implications. The first one is that, except in extreme cases, I don't believe in forcing help on kids that they don't want, forcing kids that they fight. Now, certainly if kids are suicidal, we put them in treatment no matter what. If they have drug problems, we put them in a program even if they don't want to. And if they have to be in sexual education, even if they fight it constantly, I mean, they can't be in a regular classroom, or that we do what we need to do. However, as much as possible, we want to avoid forcing help on kids that they don't want or they don't think they need. And I'd much rather have a kid say, I believe that one of the best messages you can give a kid, a young kid, is you're the expert on you. I don't always know what's right for you. And I think with adolescents, I think that the best message you can give them, besides I love you, is I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life, and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before I send you off to college. So I think that, so the first implication is that we want to offer help to kids, try to make the case about what they could get out of it. But if they don't want it, they don't want to see a tutor, they don't want a speech and language therapist, I don't believe in trying to force them on it, because I don't want them to be spending their energy fighting what's probably in their own best interest. And most kids, if we make the case for it, we can say, well, if you don't want to do it now, let's check back in a month and see whether you think you might need it. I'd much rather do that than month after month after month try to force a kid to work. I went to a school meeting a couple of years ago, a 5th grader in public school in Maryland, and the speech pathologist said, I've been working with this kid since 1st grade and he fights me every session. And I said, you just give it a break. Don't work harder than he does. I said, does it feel to you like you're working harder to improve his articulation than he is? Oh, absolutely. I said, stop immediately. This will never change until you change the energy. So the first implication is we don't try to force help, we offer help. The second is that as adults, we have so much more wisdom and experience to share with kids. But I don't believe in trying to ram it down kids' throats. You know, one of our favorite cartoons, this dad has his 2 sons by the nape of the neck. He says, listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm only going to tell you this 1,000,000 times. You know, and so many parents say, God, I've told him 1,000,000 times. I keep telling him, I keep trying to get him to see. And we say, change the energy. Change the energy. To try to get buy-in. So our new book that's coming out in August or September, it's called What Do You Say? And it's about how to talk with kids. And the first key for us when we're talking with kids is getting buy-in. We don't want to just the kids blather, blah, 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 blah. You know, one of my colleagues moved to Florida several years ago, and she sent me a card that said, I want to give you some advice that my mother gave me, because I sure as hell won't be using it. You know, and we want to, so we say, you know, I've got an idea about that. Do you want to hear it? You know, I'm wondering what would happen if you did it this way, where is opposed to try to lay stuff on kids, to lay our experience, lay our wisdom on kids, to try to get buy-in. And I was talking about this in New York 3 years ago, and this woman turned to the audience and said, "This has transformed my relationship with my 15-year-old daughter. She's in a boarding school, and we talk several times a week. And every time it turns into an argument because she brings up a problem. And I said, well, you need to do this or this or this. And then she fights back on it. And it just devolves into an argument. So last week when she called, she said, and she brought up some problem. I said, is there a way that I could help? And she said it completely changed the energy. Then it was fun. Then it was fun to brainstorm. I wasn't trying to lay stuff on. I wasn't trying to solve her problems for her. I was just a resource that you could use. And it was so fun to brainstorm what to do. And I treated her respectfully, like she's got a brain in her head. She can help figure this out. And changing the energy in that way. So not forcing help, not forcing our wisdom, experience, advice on kids. Third is, and I'll just tell you that not forcing is huge. I got a call, actually a woman called my wife who managed my calendar and stuff. This is before COVID. It said, my 8th grade son is at the same Catholic school, actually, it turns out, a different kid. And he was diagnosed with ADHD in 2nd grade. And he's refused all these years to take medication. And he's applying to high schools, Catholic high schools. He's got all C's, and he's a really smart kid. Would Bill talk him into taking medication? And my wife said, well, Bill doesn't believe in trying to talk kids into stuff, but he'll talk to them about it. So the kid comes in, and the first thing I say is, I don't want anybody to try to force you to take this medication. Said, I saw the testing from when you're young, you're a really smart person. You can decide whether something helps you or not. What my advice is to make an informed decision, meaning try it out and just see what it does. Because if it doesn't help you, you're not going to use it. If it helps you 15%, it's not worth it. If it has bad side effects, don't use it. If it really helps you and has minimal side effects, you can still decide to use it or not. Nobody's going to make you do it. I said, if somebody tries to force you, all you do is you put it in your cheek, you practice a little bit, hold it in your cheek, pretending to swallow, and then spit it out. I don't want anybody forcing you, but I want you to make an informed decision. And he tried it like a couple of days later. He was all for it, within 6 weeks he was a straight A student. And it's not, as you know, it's often not that. It's usually not that dramatic. But in this kid, it was. And the pediatrician a year before had a come to Jesus meeting with this kid, trying to get him to see how important it is he take the medicine. He just wouldn't do it. And so if we realize that forcing doesn't usually get us where we want to go, that's important. Now the third thing is, as much as possible, I want kids to make decisions for themselves. And I said just earlier on, how it's such a great message for little kids. You're the expert on you. Where we can, give them choices, let them make decisions about stuff. And with teenagers, we want to require teenagers as they get older to make important decisions about their own life. Where Ned and I feel that ideally, kids have experience while they're living at home, running their own life before you send them off someplace to go to college or do something else. Before they leave home, they should know how to run their own life, which is a good goal to think about. And it's part of that is learning to make decisions for themselves and to pay attention. So we respect them. And the idea is we go with kids' decisions unless they're crazy, meaning unless virtually anybody would say that's a ridiculous idea, that'll never work. But usually, because kids want their life to work, if we entrust them to make decisions, they usually make as good a decisions for themselves as we can. That's been my experience in my career. And whether it's whether to work with a tutor or get language therapy or take medication, or whether they should go to a private school or stay in the public school, that I just find that kids can make good decisions for themselves if we help them, give them information, give them our point of view, help them think the pros and cons. So making decisions is the third part of this idea of supporting their decision-making of our role as a consultant. And the fourth implication is this. When kids have a problem, we want to remind ourselves, whose problem is it? So if you got a kid who you got a third grade girl who comes home from school really upset because she's the only kid in her friend group who didn't get invited to a birthday party, or you got a ninth grade boy who tries out for the basketball team and gets cut, and they're really upset because we're mammals. Our urge is to soothe them, and we certainly want to be supportive. But but we don't want to leap in and try to do all the soothing ourselves. If they have a problem, we don't want to leap in and try to solve the problem for them, because as I said earlier, the way that kids become resilient is they have a problem, their prefrontal cortex activates to deal with it, dampens down the stress response, and they cope with it. They have to have experience of coping with and solving problems themselves in order to develop that high stress tolerance and emotional resilience. So those are the 4 implications of this idea of thinking about yourself more as a consultant to your kid than as your kid's boss or manager who always knows best. And part of the implication for me is that, especially regarding decision making, is that the more I work with kids, and the more I have 2 adult children and 4 grandchildren, that the more humble I get about knowing what's in a kid's best interest. Because so often, something that seems like a disaster turns out to leads to something that completely unanticipated that was really good. And also, I don't know who a kid wants to be. And so I don't necessarily know what's right for them. And that's why I feel so strongly about supporting them and expressing confidence in them, treating them with respect. They want their life to work. And there are some kids who make better decisions than others, but still, the way you get better at it is through practice and through respectfully. Let's see how this goes. Why don't you let's go your way, and let's check back in a few weeks and see what you think. Was that a good decision? We want to be training kids to do that. Now, what I also want to tell you is this. There's a concept in our book called a non-anxious presence. And the idea is that we want parents to be moving in that direction of being a non-anxious presence in their family, in part because stress is contagious. If we're really stressed, our kids pick it up. If kids come home really stressed, it makes us stressed. And if we're more stressed than they are, we can't help them. There's so many kids, especially the kids that these really highly driven kids that Ned works with. Ned's a test prep guy. They come to Ned and they say, "Oh my God, I just got a C- on a test. My parents are going to kill me. Don't tell them like parents." And ideally, we're less stressed when a kid doesn't do well than the kid is. We remind ourselves, whose problem is it? We move in this direction of being a non-anxious presence because calm is contagious. In the same way that stress is contagious, calm is contagious. And if we're calm, we can support this autonomy more. And we've been using this term "calm is contagious." This phrase "calm is contagious" for years. And I just read today that it's something that Navy SEALs are taught, that they to stay calm because it's contagious. So whatever that's worth. And so ideally, from this point of view, home is a safe base. The idea is that life is stressful enough at work or at school. When we come home, if it's filled with conflict about trying the kids' schoolwork or fighting about stuff, that you don't have a sense to recover. And the way one of the ways kids become resilient, something stressful happens, they get stressed, they deal with it, but then you have to recover. You have to have a place to recover and not be stressed. And ideally, home is a safe base. And parents, we increasingly serve as a non-anxious presence in our family. Now, part of the way that we do this is we take a long view, meaning that all our fear and all our worry about our kids, it's about the future. It's about, because if I could, whatever your kid is going through now, if I said to you, I've seen 5,000 kids like this, and every one of them has turned out okay, you wouldn't worry very much. You say, well, this is part of their path. But it's our fear that they're going to get stuck. They're in some negative place now. They're going to get stuck in this, and it's going to get worse. Or it's not going to get better. And generally, if we don't get stuck, they don't stay stuck. And I just at Christmas this last year, I got a Christmas card from a family where I tested their 3 kids and followed them for years, but I hadn't seen any of them for at least 10 years. And the Christmas cards said, "You were right." So I opened it up and it says, "They all turned out great." And so 3 kids and their spouses, and it said, one's an engineer, one's a lawyer, one's a graphic designer, and they are all at one point in their life a completely hot mess. One of them had LD and anxiety. He got really depressed in college and was on academic probation twice, had to leave college twice. He's a very successful attorney on the Hill now. And the next day, after I get this Christmas card, I get a voicemail from a mother of a kid I tested when he's in 2nd grade, who's probably about 30 now. And the voicemail said, you told me since the time my kid was in 2nd grade, wait till he's 26 and he has a fully mature prefrontal cortex. He said, he just turned 26. And this is the most output resistant kid I've ever tested. The kid who would write, he actually, on a writing assignment in 3rd grade, he had to write sentences for spelling words. He starts to write the word angry. He writes the A, then he goes A-N-G-R-Y, that's 5 letters, M-A-D, that's only 3. He erases the A and writes mad so he wouldn't have to write 2 extra letters. That's how much he hated writing, how much he hated working. And she said, he just turned 26. He's a very successful sound engineer. He's got a wonderful partner. He's a wonderful son. But it was slow coming. And so part of the way that we can move in this direction of being a non-anxious presence is by taking a long view. Another way is we set the goal of just enjoying our kids. And I'm not sure there's anything better for our kids than simply enjoying being with them. And when I used to do therapy with parents who had difficult kids or they're knocking heads a lot, I'd say, let's set the goal of just enjoying the kid more. We'll work backwards and we'll try to eliminate the stuff that's keeping you from enjoying your kid. But that was the goal, because when kids are enjoyed, they experience themselves as joy-creating organisms as opposed to frustration or anxiety-producing organisms. So we wanted to, those are 2 suggestions. Also, one of my favorite cartoons involves a father who was not an non-anxious presence. It's these 2 teenage boys, and they're walking, and one says, "God, I'm so sick of my dad. He's constantly on my back about my schoolwork, constantly telling me, get those grades up. Last night I couldn't take it anymore. I said, get that salary up," which was a pretty cool perspective. So another construct in our book that relates to the sense of autonomy and control is radical downtime. And we think about 3 forms of radical downtime. One is having time to daydream. And for a lot of kids with ADHD, this isn't so hard, but having time to daydream or be in your own head, because we know that creativity and problem solving are hugely related to having time to just letting your mind go where it goes. And also, kids have to have adequate time to reflect on themselves in order to develop a coherent sense of identity and a sense of empathy for other people. So it's having enough time, not being so overscheduled, not having earplugs in constantly, not being on a screen constantly, so they have some time, unplugged time, where they're just in their own head. Secondly, it's meditation. Both Ned and I practice transcendental meditation, and I've done 2 studies of middle school age kids practicing TM with ADHD, practicing TM in school. It's got beautiful results. And we interviewed kids after the first study and asked them what they noticed after 3 months of meditating twice a day in school. And they all said, I'm much less anxious. Most of them said, I'm better organized. I can do my homework better by myself. This one kid who was wildly impulsive said, before I started meditating, if I was walking in the hall and somebody bumped me, I just turn around and hit them. Now that I've been meditating though, if I'm walking in the hall and somebody bumps me, I stop and think, should I hit him or not? Which we thought was pretty good progress with ADHD. So I'm working and trying to support getting meditation into school programs, and because it can be life transforming for kids as it is for adults. And the third is sleep. And there's arguably nothing more important for the developing brain than sleep. kids with special needs tend to be at higher risk for sleep problems, and we want to do what we can to help them develop a consistent, healthy sleep schedule. And so the sleep is a really big deal. And what we suggest is that because so many of adults are under rested or have insomnia as well, make staying well rested a family goal and support each other. I mean, I've worked with many families where the parents say, God, I'm constantly fighting with my kid trying to get him to go to bed. And I say, how do you sleep? Oh, I have a terrible insomnia. Talk to your kid about that. Talk about the challenge we all face of getting to bed on time and getting enough sleep. So the sleep is a big deal. And the last thing I'll just say before I take questions is this. I want kids to have an accurate model of reality. And many of the kids growing up in this area have the idea that if you aren't a top student, you're going to end up with a C- life. That the valedictorians are going to be more successful than anybody else, or the top 5%. If you don't go to an elite college, you might as well, you're going to end up working McDonald's. And I want kids to understand, including kids with special needs, to understand that this is largely untrue, that it seems to make very little difference where you go to college, that dyslexia, because we have learning dyslexia, actually confers advantages in several different areas in adult life, that the world is full of successful people who have learning disabilities or ADHD, a lot of people with autism who contributed incredible things. I mean, I just think about the fact that the coolest kids now, their whole life is technology that was made by people that they've never been friends with, who are nerdy, many on the spectrum who did develop this incredible electronic technology. And so I want kids to understand also that life isn't a race. So many of the kids with special needs that we know with ADHD, the prefrontal cortex is like 3 to 5 years less mature. So there's a lot of late bloomers. And I see tons of kids, including my own son who had ADHD, who has a PhD in psychology, and nobody would have predicted that. He was always in kind of supported classes and this and that in a religious, in a Jewish school, but nobody who knew him in elementary school or middle school or high school even would have thought, oh, sure, he'll get a PhD in psychology. And so I think that I want kids to understand they have a lot of chances to recreate themselves. Life isn't a race. That oftentimes that valedictorians aren't more successful than other people by the time they're about 25 or 26. So I want them to have an accurate model of reality, and I want to conclude by saying, within the first couple of years of my career, I tested this kid whose mother was a humorist, and she said, we really shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents, because it's humbling. And ideally, what we want to do, we close our book with a line that's attributed to Maya Angelou, which is that kids will forget most of what we do for them, and they'll forget most of what we say to them. What they remember is how we make them feel. And from our point of view, we want them to feel loved and supported. And we also want them to feel trusted and confident. And we think by focusing on supporting this sense of autonomy, the sense of control, we can accomplish all 4 of these goals. So I'm going to stop here, take any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a list of questions for you.
Okay.
So give me a moment here just to get things up and rolling. All right.
Michelle, if I can just for a second, I'd
Yep.
like to take a moment to remind those in the YouTube, if you do have any questions, please hit refresh. The live chat should be open, and you may need to refresh the page to see it, but please feel free to submit any questions there as well.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm just going to try to plow through these, and we'll see how many we can get through in the time that we have. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. When you feel like the educators that your child works with have a fixed mindset, due to the lack of providing access to challenging curricula. Do you have any suggestions for turning the conversations towards a growth mindset where the child's strengths are realized and the team can move forward together?
Well, I'm not sure I completely understand about the fixed mindset, but I will say that optimal education, the optimal educational environment is high challenge, low threat. And the idea is that kids aren't challenged, they're bored. And being bored is really stressful. And so I think that in some ways, I mean, that in special education, you know, special education is not required to optimize the kid's development. It's basically to provide an appropriate program, not to optimize. So I come at it with we know there's hundreds of studies that conclude that it's this high challenge, low threat. And if we aren't challenging kids, then we aren't engaging them. That we aren't developing their brain in the way we want. And I focus on the boredom part. If kids are not being sufficiently challenged, and how harmful just being bored is for kids. So next question.
Absolutely so. This one's a little bit almost rhetorical, but knowing that consequences and reward programs are so pervasive and that they don't build autonomy and control, why haven't we embraced these principles to engage how to support behavior? So I guess the question then is, what do we do to get this knowledge pushed out?
So I think that I'm not totally opposed to rewards, but we can use kind of more extrinsic kinds of motivation in a way that's autonomy supportive. So what I did with because I knew this stuff, most of it, when my kids were little, and my kid who had learning disabilities and ADHD, what I would do is he just, math facts were really hard for him, and he kind of resisted doing it. And at one point I said, you know, don't do it for me, but if you'd like to try to get these math facts more automatic, I'm willing to drill you, and I'm willing to pay you $1 for the 7s table, the 8 table, the 9 table, like that. And I do it very simply. I'd say, don't do it for me. I'm not trying to bribe you to do, but I think we can use. So here's the idea. So often, you got a kid who say it's a mid-May, really nice night, and the kid has resisted his homework or avoided his homework for an hour and a half. And you say, look, the rest of the family's going out for ice cream in half an hour. If you haven't done your homework, you can't come. The kid's Johnny on the spot. He gets it done in 15 minutes. What happens is that the anticipation of the ice cream jack ups the level of dopamine in the kid's brain. The kid can actually focus on his homework, can actually get engaged with it. So I'm not entirely opposed to using rewards in a way of, I'm willing to offer this to you if you need it to activate your brain. If the task itself isn't rewarding enough, I'm willing to offer you some incentive. So I'm not completely opposed to it. However, what we want to do primarily is to find out what's a kid interested in. How do we use that? How do we use the kid's intrinsic motivation? What's interesting to him, or what he would want to do, and try to get him to work on skills that way, as opposed to just trying to force stuff on kids they have no interest in.
So actually, that segues into another question of, what if you have a child who is not absorbed in any activity in particular? Essentially, your child hasn't found their passion. The child's tried lots of things, nothing clicks. They move from one thing to the next, and forcing them to do an activity just obviously backfires.
Yeah, I think it's fine for a family to say, look, you need to be doing one extracurricular. We all have something we do outside of our work, outside of school. And I want you to be developing yourself in different ways. I don't care what it is, but I think we make a kind of a family rule like that. I think that's fine. But the other thing I want to say is, don't worry. There's a story in the book. I'm just about this mother. I tested this girl when she was 5 for the first, maybe 4 when she was the first time, and she's close to 30 now. And for years, her mother would come in 2 or 3 times a year and just consult with me about what should I do about this or that. And when the kid was 14, the mom came in, was really worried the kid didn't have a passion. And so she comes in, and I said, look, that kid, you can't force it. Make sure she's exposed to stuff, but also remember how many influences are there on a kid's life that we have no control over. Don't think that somehow you're the only person that can help a kid find a passion. So the mother comes in 6 months later, and she asked me about something else. And I said, didn't we talk 6 months ago about passions? Where's that? She said, oh my God. She said, I guess I didn't tell you that after we last spoke, somebody told her about the Washington Area Rescue League, and she spends 2 hours every night working on finding homes for the rescued animals. You know, and I didn't see it coming. The mother didn't see it coming. So the basically idea is don't worry very much about it. There's so many, whether it's a teacher or a coach or a girlfriend or something a kid sees on the internet. There's so many ways that kids can develop something that they really care about. So don't worry too much about it. And work out reasonable limits on electronic entertainment. Work out reasonable limits on gaming, and it's hard to do with COVID, but gaming and social media. So that's because those things are designed by some of the smartest psychologists and behavioral specialists in the world to be addictive and to be impossible to put down. So we want to make sure they have doing other stuff besides that. But if they don't have a passion, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. Here's a quick question of, would you please repeat again the name of the person who you were talking about, who's done the research or work on passion pursuit?
Oh, so the guy's name is Reed Larson. And I learned about Reed Larson in one of the first books that was written about brain development. It's called Magic Trees of the Mind by Marion Diamond, who was one of the early pioneers that showed that your experience affects the way your brain develops. And she wrote this really nice book sometime in the late 90s. And she mentions Reed Larson's research. That's where I first found out about it.
Thank you. Next question. Given the correlation with kids with ADHD and sleep issues, as well as the correlation with sleep apnea and ADHD-like behaviors, at what point then do you recommend sleep studies?
Well, I certainly think that just if you got ADHD, that you want to track. Does my kid seem to have trouble falling asleep? Does he snore? Is he tired when he wakes up? Even after and if any of those things are true, then you want to start with your pediatrician, and sometimes that it's a matter of just working out a healthy sleep routine. I would say at least half the kids with ADHD I see, at least half, take melatonin to facilitate kind of consistent bedtime and sleep onset. And certainly, as the questioner said, there's a surprisingly high percentage of kids with ADHD who have breathing-related sleep problems, and sometimes removing tonsils and adenoids will take care of that. And so I definitely think that if the kid is tired, the kid can't fall asleep, the kid's waking up in the middle of the night, the kid is snoring loudly, talk to the pediatrician as the first step. And if the pediatrician you aren't satisfied, then have a consultation with a sleep specialist at Children's Hospital or someplace.
Absolutely. And I'll push out there to the people watching. I have 3 kids with ADHD and sleep apnea. So feel free to shoot me any questions on that too.
You're the expert. Right.
Let's see. Do you have any suggestions on how to help a child who has significant motor and communication needs? So they need a lot of assistance, but they're also exhibiting anger and frustration due to their disability. They want autonomy, but they can't physically do what they want to be doing. What suggestions do you have for helping those children?
That's a really good question. And I don't have a ton of expertise in this area. And so my thought is that I think that is looking for, is encouraging as much as possible this decision making. Certainly to giving choices about how do you want to do this. What do you think works best? Even if a person has limited communication or limited motor skills, does this help you more than this? This kind of anything that we can support the idea that you can make choices. I respect your choices. I don't always know what's right for you. But in terms of the specific, how do the skills, it's something that how do we maximize those skills to increase it? That's not something I'm particularly expert at.
Okay. Next one. Do you recommend the love and logic approach where there's an emphasis on natural consequences as a good approach for building autonomy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this new book that Ned and I are just finishing, the last chapter is called, I mean, the title comes from a lecture that I gave in Dallas about our book. And somebody wrote me afterwards and said, well, what about consequences? And so, yeah, natural consequences are a great teaching tool. I mean, so if a kid, a kid forgets to bring their umbrella, they get rained on. I mean, that kind of, and natural consequences means that you don't have to structure some kind of consequence. It just happens, and it's a very good teaching tool. I don't know. I'm not an expert on love and logic, but I will say that one of the neuropsychologists in my group used to teach love and logic in California, and she loves the approach in our book. It's very consistent with love and logic.
Yeah, a lot of what you were talking about sounds like that approach. Yeah. Let's see. What do you suggest when my 9th grader is just so beaten up by life that he hides from it? So this relates to when you were talking about kids who just withdraw and just stop and avoid. But his is to the point of refusing to feed himself, clean up, etc. How do we teach autonomy to kids who have experienced trauma? And so they automatically respond with that fight, flight, freeze response.
Well, so part of it is that we, that there are, I mean, what we say in the book is that there are exceptions to this idea of being a consultant to a kid. And the exceptions include kids who are so depressed that they can't function, kids who are suicidal, kids who are drug involved. And we do treatments or interventions for them, whether they want them or not. If a kid can't feed himself, we may need to look at a higher level of intervention that a kid has right now. Mm-hmm. But I think that my own feeling is that what we want to do is that kids who are really, really discouraged and just feel beaten down, kids have been traumatized, that we want to focus on the physiology as much as possible, because that including the sleep. Because the way the body recovers from trauma, from the kind of what feels like assaults by life, one of the main mechanisms of recovery is sleep. And almost anybody who's had a lot of trauma has a lot of trouble sleeping. Mm-hmm. And so one of the first tools, if we can get kids to do it, is learning transcendental meditation. I mean, it's hugely beneficial for trauma. It's hugely, I know so many, because not a lot of traumatized teenagers have learned it, but I know so many young adults who had trauma, who couldn't sleep more than a couple hours a night for 2 years, who learned to meditate, and they slept 12 hours that night. And it's just because you have to feel safe. You have to feel safe in your own skin in order to sleep. So I focus on the physiology, and including ideally meditation is part of it. If kids don't want to meditate, some of these newer kind of brain stimulation programs like Apollo or Alpha Stim are things that kids can use that start to regulate that stress response better. I believe, I know some people are reluctant to use melatonin or other things to facilitate sleep, and because maybe what if there's bad side effects down the road? Well, my feeling is that people have been taking melatonin, kids have been taking melatonin for at least 30 years. I'm not aware of any known long-term side effects, and we're very aware of the side effects, the effects of not sleeping. So I focus on the physiological part and do what we can to regulate the physiology. And as they get older, the tools like yoga or Tai Chi are really useful. For some kids, horseback riding is a good self-regulatory tool. Dance for some people. But that's the main thing for me is trying to focus on because they've had trauma. That until you get the physiology starting to work more normally, it's really hard to make other things happen.
Do you, on that note, do you have suggestions for meditative or focusing activities that don't have a primary focus on breathing? Because we have kids who have a hard time taking over and controlling their breathing pattern.
Yeah. And the way I think about it is this, that breathing is great emergency for a lot of people and a lot of adults. Using the breath is really, it's a great emergency medicine tool, but it's boring. And so it's not like you want to sit and just, it's part of the reason that meditations that focus on your breath, the kids don't do it, a lot of adults don't do it, is it's boring.
And so, we have kids who can't do it.
Yeah.
Physically can't.
Right. And so, so some of these, I'm interested I'm just starting to follow. There's a psychologist in Northern Virginia. Actually, he doesn't live there anymore, but he still practices, sees peace in Virginia. Josh Weiner, who is a big fan of alpha stim, which is something you just kind of clip on a kid's earlobe. And it stimulates the brain in a way that produces more alpha waves. And he says probably helps about 80% of the kids who use it. It can help with insomnia, anxiety, depression. There's also another stimulation program called Apollo that I'm just starting to look into. Transcendental meditation, if you get kids to do it, doesn't focus on the breathing at all. You get a mantra or this sound that has no meaning to you, and you just very gently think the sound. And our studies demonstrated that kids with ADHD can learn to meditate easily. It's not with TM. You don't get better at it the more you do it because it's just so easy. It's effortless. It's not like developing a muscle. You just learn how to do it. And we showed that kids with ADHD could learn how to do it easily.
Thank you for that one. I think I need to add on my to-do list to remember to meditate. So another question, the idea that home is a safe space. How do we balance this with the fact that right now home is school and not just homework? And many of us are working as the one-on-one aids for our children to access school.
Right. And so here's my feeling is this. I think it's toxic to fight about the same thing over and over and over and over again, no matter what.
Yep.
And I would rather have my kid, even if I have a kid who has serious special needs, I'd rather have them work for half an hour without fighting with them than fight with them for 3 hours to try to get them to work for an hour. And I think that part of this approach is just based on the reality that you can't make another human being do something against their will. Also, you can't make somebody want what they don't want. And you can't make them not want what they want. And if we make peace with this, the fact, and when I was aware of this when my kids were little, and my son, my daughter, just it never occurred to her that you'll want to stone me when I say this, but it never occurred to my daughter that she could do something she wasn't supposed to do. My son was different. If he'd start to fight me on something, I'd say, it feels to me like you think I think I could make you do this. I couldn't make you do it. All you'd have to do is close your eyes or flop to the floor. I can't make you do this. I'm not going to try to make you do this. And I think this idea that if we recognize, if it feels like I'm forcing, something's wrong with this picture. And it's not that at certain times you got to get in the car, there's an emergency, you got to do, you put them in the car, but we don't want to do that chronically. And again, fighting about the same thing over and over again, it's just bad for it just undermines that relatedness that contributes to internal motivation. So my feeling is be a consultant, offer to help, to set things up. And if your kid goes for a week or not doing very much during COVID, for God's sake, I mean, where kids aren't getting that much out of it anyway, that so be it. But at least you're preserving your relationship, and you set limits of the kids not playing video games all day. And you're offering to support, you're offering to do so, you're offering to read to them, whatever you can do. But don't think that somehow, see, it couldn't be your job to make your kid do his virtual learning, because all he'd have to do is close his eyes and you couldn't make him do it. So theoretically, it couldn't be your responsibility as a parent. Keeping that in mind, offer to help, offer support, or if it's not working for you, try to find a teenager, an older kid who will get on the Zoom and work with the kid to try to get him to do his work. Oftentimes kids will work much better for a slightly older kid than they will for a parent.
Would you recommend as well parents advocating to the school team to be reducing potentially the amount of virtual school that the kid is in or the subjects that the kid's
Completely. I mean, I just listened to a great lecture by Peter Gray, who studied play from an evolutionary physiological point of view for 30, 40 years. And he says kids need more play, less school. You know, that play is the way that mammals learn how to deal in this world. And so, yes, I mean, we know homeschooled kids need to work about 2 hours a day to complete what most kids do in a full school day. And I'd rather have a kid work for an hour, really focused on it without fighting, than fighting with him for 3 hours and try to get him to do an hour and a half. It's just not worth it in the long run, because it undermines that intrinsic motivation so much. And it gives kids the message, don't trust yourself, trust me. I know it's better for you. And so I guess I think that being a fierce advocate for your kid is really right. If it's too much, and I think one of the best lines I ever learned, there's a book, kind of an anti-homework book that came out maybe 10 years ago, written by two lawyers. And they say, just tell your teacher, this isn't working for my kid. And I think it's a really good line. That teachers they don't want your kid to be suffering. And so if whatever it is, if you're fighting with it, you're feeling like somehow I'm supposed to be able to make my kid do this, I read The Self-Driven Child, read it a second time, just because the science is so compelling about why this is right, and how little kids get out of stuff that they're forced to do. And if there's too much, talk to the teacher, say, this isn't working for my kid.
I want to be mindful of your time, because I know we're approaching our stop time this evening. So I'm just looking through the questions, because I think that you have answered some of them either directly or indirectly, so I don't want to kind of repeat on them. One question, you mentioned electronics a lot, and that, you know, kids are so hooked in on them. For a teenager, say a 15, 16-year-old, what do you do to get buy-in from the kid on managing those electronics and cutting off the time to emphasize to your child the need for sleep? Okay.
So I want kids to know, especially teenagers, I want them to know two things. One is that in 2018, 200 psychologists signed a letter to the American Psychological Association asking them to censure psychologists who are working in Silicon Valley, knowingly creating products for children that are as addictive as possible. I want them to know this is kind of what we're up against. And the second thing is I want them to watch the Netflix documentary The Social Dilemma with their kids. I mean, that shows kids how manipulated they're being by big tech companies, by social media. And so I want them to understand, you know, that it's not some character flaw in them, that they're supposed to like this stuff. And what Ned and I recommend in The Self-Driven Child, and also our new book, is that more mentoring rather than monitoring. And so the idea is you always, when we're talking with the kids about anything, Start with empathy. Start with trying to understand what their experience is when they're playing, when they're gaming, or when they're using social media. And ideally, have them show you the games they play. Try to play with them. Have them teach you to play it, and they'll kick your butt. But at least it's respectful, and you can say, "I can see why you love this so much, and I can see why it's so hard to quit." It just makes you much more able. If all the energy is no, 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 stop, 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 you got to get off that. It makes you have no credibility, and your kid will just fight you. So start with empathy, and a line that works pretty well is what we recommend in our book is a lot of collaborative problem solving, which when you're not pissed and the kid's not pissed, you have a talk and you say, let's talk about this a little bit. And I understand, and you start with empathy. So I think I understand why this is so cool. And I know that you're really good at this, and that must be a great feeling. You start like that. You say, and from my point of view, I want you to enjoy it, but also I worry that if you're doing it too much, it takes away from the other things that are really important to you. And so we got to find a way to have a schedule for using this stuff that works for you, but also works for me. Because I don't want to resent this. I don't want to resent you. I don't want to fight with you all the time like that. And
Thank you. Absolutely. And that's a lot of Ross Green, who we actually had, we did a program with.
Oh, good. Yeah. And so, I mean, people have been, the idea of family meetings or having this collaborative problem, this goes way back in the tradition of authoritative or positive parenting. But Ross Green kind of really applied it to a very difficult population. And yeah, it's the same stuff. And Ross Green's website has a lot of good videos that demonstrate how to use this collaborative problem solving. But it's just, and I also just look at where do you have leverage? And one of the places you have leverage is whether you send a kid to college or not. And you don't want to send a kid to college if you're still monitoring their electronics. In the same way you don't want to send them to college if you're still getting out of bed in the morning.
Thank you. I know we have a few more questions, but I really do want to watch your time and be respectful of it. We had said that we would be stopping at 9. And I think that sort of the constant answer that comes through a lot of it is partnering with your child and making essentially other people be the bad guy, whether it's that kids don't like feeling manipulated. So for your teenager, letting them know that, this company is trying to do this. So you're going to let them get it, or letting school be the bad guy instead of you being the bad guy. But the other piece is tolerating your child not doing what you want them to do, and working on building that tolerance as a parent.
Well, that's the thing. What we talk a lot about in our new book is if you take my advice or the advice that we give in the self-driven child, and you start to think about yourself more as a consultant, what it means is you spend more time sitting on your hands and zipping your lip. And there's nothing more stressful than sitting on your hands and zipping your lip because you have experienced such a low sense of control. So and when kids aren't doing well, and I've always felt this, when kids aren't doing well, most of our work is on ourselves. Mm-hmm. We focus on changing our child, but most of our work, it's healing our own fear, our own anger, our own guilt, so that we can be a non-anxious presence. We can stay in the present with our kid. We can be supportive and not basically not and not let our kid avoid. Again, one of the things that kids do is that if we're very worried about them, we know all their homework assignments, they don't have to worry about it. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to the kids, but we don't want to spend more energy. We don't want to take more responsibility for them than they do, because it's one way that they let us work. They manage their anxiety in part by letting us worry about it. And in the long run, we don't help them that way. So I did tell my wife I joined her at 9 o'clock.
And we are there. So we want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And thank you very much for your time. We really, really do appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing our discussions in our SEPTA Facebook groups. Let's definitely talk about this, and let's talk about how we support one another as parents in letting our kids fail. That blessing of a skinned knee and let them get the B+. So
Can I say one thing?
absolutely.
Because I've been preaching this gospel for many years, parents have many times said, so you're saying just let them fail. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying offer any support that they need. I don't want kids to fail. I want them to do well, but if they fail, that's okay. If they learn from it, but I don't want them to fail. I want to offer help, but I don't want to try to force it.
But we have to tolerate them not doing what we want them to do.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and yes. And knowing that we don't always know what's best. I mean, the first time I went to graduate school, I was in a PhD program in Berkeley, and I flunked. I went for 20 straight weeks, and I was so anxious and insecure, I didn't turn in a single assignment, and so I flunked out. And I felt like my whole life had gone up in smoke. I had this fantasy about being a 26-year-old English professor. I had no clue what I was going to do. I got right after that, I got fired from a job as a typist after 2 weeks. And after I got flunked out of graduate school, it took me about 2 months to realize that was the best possible thing that could have happened to me. I realized there's no way I should have been an English professor. I felt like an imposter. And I started to work with children within a year or so. And then, okay, this is more kind of my thing. But it felt to me like a complete disaster. And it turned out to be the best possible thing. And I think that we realize we don't always know what's best for our kid. They can help us with that idea of not feeling we have to get them to see it our way or do it our way. It's so nice to talk with all you folks, and I wish you all well.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
So thank you to everybody for joining us this evening, and please reach out to SEPTA. And I'm sorry we couldn't get through everybody's questions, but I hope that we touched on at least the underlying issues that go with a lot of them. So thank you all for your time tonight. Be well and stay safe and keep on being patient. We'll get there, everybody. Thanks. Have a good night.